Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show, and thank you for joining me this evening. I'll be your host, meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service. And if you'd like additional forecast information, you can always go online at weather.gov/Alaska. If you have any questions or interesting things to pass on to me, you can go ahead and send them to peter.chan@noaa.gov. Well, taking a look at what we have in the headlines, Alaska weather headlines, there is a lingering area of low pressure that's out over the Gulf right now that's going to impact primarily the southeast and panhandle now into Thursday with some additional periods of rain or showers and perhaps some at least small craft conditions and low-end gales. But a more powerful 970 millibar bearing low is going to take shape as we go through the overnight and Wednesday, and that's going to drop southeastward down toward the eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula by later Thursday. And that's going to help form yet a second stronger low that could bottom out somewhere around or even below 950 millibars in the Gulf as we go through Friday into Saturday. And that's going to be a very strong fall storm. High-end wind, marine impacts. There could even be some minor flooding possible due to some of the heavier rainfall that'll fall, especially along the North Gulf Coast into the southeast panhandle, where some areas could pick up perhaps 3-4 inches of rainfall. But we'll have more on that coming up here as we head through the next few days as the forecast models come into better agreement on the exact strength and location of that particular low here for the end of the week. So here is a post that the AKwx forecast office put out. This low that's going to be deepening and intensifying to the west-southwest of St. Lawrence Island and west-northwest of St. Matthew will be dropping southeastward as we go through Wednesday night into early Thursday morning, and most likely be situated just north of Unalaska or Dutch Harbor. And this low, as I mentioned, could bottom out on somewhere near or below 970 millibars. And at this point, we are anticipating widespread storm force winds with the potential for isolated areas of hurricane force winds, especially in the vicinity of St. Matthew Island, and that would lead to some waves there in the open bearing upwards of 25 and 35 feet. So that's going to be one of the strongest storms we've seen in the Bering so far this early fall season, and then that energy is going to end up working its way, swinging up off of the Alaska Peninsula in the North Pacific, and then lifting northward up through the Gulf of Alaska for Friday into Saturday, producing potentially an even stronger low. So here's the precipitation forecast coming up for tomorrow across the state on Wednesday. You can see that enhanced brighter green area back toward St. Lawrence, west of St. Lawrence. And then you'll see also an area of enhanced green, which could bring about perhaps half to locally an inch of rainfall there. The southern third of the panhandle tomorrow, Ketchikan on over toward Craig. And then Thursday, as that Gulf low, in response to the increased flow that's coming up, that's going to develop more precipitation along the coast, especially from the mouth of Cook Inlet eastward to Yakutat. That's just the beginning, because there's even going to be some heavier rainfall as we go through Friday into Saturday, and I'll show you at least for the hint of Friday's early outlook come tomorrow. But definitely that storm that's going to impact the Gulf here later in the week is the one we'll be really keeping an eye on, because it will affect more people. Taking a look, though, satellite imagery, we are looking at the clouds and enhancement. You see that counterclockwise spin west of Haida Gwaii, and that's that current low that's going to continue to impact particularly the southeast and the panhandle here as we go through now into the day on Thursday. If we look off into the central areas of the state, interior, Dillingham up toward Anchorage, Kodiak, just west of Kodiak, we've seen clearing because there is a weak ridge of high pressure in place that's brought about some very pleasant but chilly fall weather. The main energy is associated, though, back to the west, coming off of the coast of Russia and Japan. And there's a very strong jet stream that's working its way through the western half of the Aleutians and lower Bering. That's going to help spin up that low west of St. Lawrence as we go through the night, and especially during the day on Wednesday. So again, we have the low sitting out there. It's going to become a little elongated there, in the Gulf. But the energy that's just now starting to reach, you can see kind of those white enhanced clouds coming off of the Russian coast and Kamchatka. That area there is the leading edge of that stronger jet stream winds. It's going to help spin up this very strong surface low. So here's the maps. There's the low pressure this afternoon, 988 low located in the central Gulf. As we go through tonight, you'll see the low beginning to develop now to the west-southwest of St. Lawrence Island, and it will rapidly deepen during the day on Wednesday. Meanwhile, occluded front lifts northward up into the lower portion of the Panhandle, and that's going to bring some rains as it dissipates, and yet another front kind of lifts on up toward Vancouver. But look at the low to the west there in the Bering, dropping down near or below 970 millibars by Wednesday late afternoon and evening. So again, we expect widespread storm force winds with this feature, and perhaps some hurricane force winds, especially in the vicinity of the St. Matthew Island marine zone. So by Thursday, the low kind of splits a bit, but the main southwestern piece of energy is located there just to the north of Dutch Harbor, the eastern Aleutians, and that is going to then rotate out into the North Pacific and pivot on up into the Gulf as we go through Friday and Saturday, and rapidly deepen further, so that it could bottom out somewhere around 950 millibars as we go through the day on Friday. Looking at the low temperatures tonight, generally where it's cloudy and rainy, low mid-40s, the southern half of the Panhandle. Interior could still see some teens where it's still clear, otherwise below freezing most areas except for along the coast as you get south of the Kenai. And then Wednesday afternoon, looking at upper 40s, lower 50s in the Panhandle, 40s to near 50 in a few spots, but generally 40s still across much of the south central areas. And then lows again will get down below freezing across the south central interior, maybe 23 there at Talkeetna. And looking at the lows where the clouds and rain continues, the Panhandle low to mid 40s. And then temperatures for Thursday should manage to reach low and mid 50s in the Panhandle, but generally in the 40s back through the south central areas. Along the Arctic coast, below freezing, and of course colder in the interior where skies are still partly cloudy in spots, as that weak ridge of high pressure will still kind of be hanging around overnight into Friday morning toward the Alcan border. That'll allow many temperatures to get down into the teens. To the west, the Seward Peninsula will stop near the freezing mark as clouds will be increasing with a trough coming on shore. And then temperatures Wednesday generally below freezing. Brooks Range north slope on over toward the Arctic coast, and pockets there in the Alaska Range. And then as we go into Thursday morning, chilly across much of the region. We're going to see lows getting well down into the teens in most areas except for along the coast, a little warmer. And then high temperatures Thursday afternoon below freezing, Brooks Range north slope. And perhaps upper 30s to near 40 degrees from Nome eastward through the along and south of the Yukon River, including Fairbanks. And then for Wednesday morning, look for lows below freezing across the southwest interior, but generally near or above 40 as we go out along the Alaska Peninsula into the Aleutians. And for Wednesday afternoon, temperatures will be chilly there up through the middle, so we get up through the middle Yukon and upper Kuskokwim river basins. The highs generally only in the upper 30s, but still around 50 along, extending out through the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. And then lows Thursday morning will generally be below freezing in the 20s there along the Alaska Range. Some of the normally cold spots there just west of the Alaska Range will easily get down into the teens. And along the coast, lows generally still above freezing, mid-30s, Nunavik Island, and extending down toward Dillingham, and then out over the Alaska Peninsula and into the Aleutians. Lows generally near 40, with highs getting back up in most areas of the peninsula in the 40s, and still 30s there, the interior southwest. Quick check of temperature outlook. October 4th through the 8th, we are expecting near normal to a bit below normal temperatures extending from south central areas in through the Panhandle. And then looking at precipitation, it looks like it could get wet again back through the west and southwest portions of the state for early October, with a drier strip running along the Alcan border from the Arctic coast all the way down toward Yakutat. And so overall, though, this cold pattern, this chillier pattern will continue, and this upcoming storm could really draw down some colder air from the north.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on now to flight weather. If you are planning a flight for midweek Wednesday into Thursday, the main weather player will be a developing area of low pressure out over the north central Bering that will deepen down somewhere around 965 millibars with widespread gale and storm force winds. There will be a weakening and elongated area of low pressure out over the Gulf that will impact the southeast panhandle. But otherwise, that low in the Bering will be the main feature as it dives southeastward across the Alaska Peninsula as we go through Thursday, and then reemerges and spins up a very strong low out in the Gulf, which could bottom out somewhere below 950 millibars Friday night into Saturday morning. Otherwise, widespread IFR conditions across much of the northern portion of the state Wednesday morning, an area out over the central Bering, and then the southern third of the panhandle. As we go into Wednesday afternoon, we are looking for IFR conditions. The eastern Brooks Range to the north slope there in along the northeast Arctic coast, a small pocket of IFR around the north end, Chilkoot and White there of the panhandle, and then off of the west coast approaching Nunavik Island and encompassing St. George as well as St. Matthew. And then as we go into Thursday morning, we are looking for IFR conditions along the north slope, Arctic coast, pockets there in the southeast panhandle, and then also areas emerging along the southwest coast into the panhandle and western part of Kodiak Island. And Thursday afternoon, we are looking for IFR, a sliver of IFR there along the inner canals, the interior mountains there, British Columbia, and the Alaska border, as well as up along the western central spine of the Brooks Range and north slopes. So past conditions Wednesday, AKwx, IFR becoming MVFR, and then MVFR being more on the north side. Same thing with Adigan. Look for IFR in the morning becoming MVFR, tending to linger on the north entrance. And then further south, VFR conditions, Lake Clark and Merrill, as well as for Rainy Pass and rounding the central Alaska range to start VFR in the morning at Windy Pass becoming MVFR, especially flying north. And then Isabel, VFR conditions with MVFR conditions, the north entrance and flying north from there. Mentasta also will see VFR conditions in the morning and especially south, but if you're flying north of the north entrance, MVFR conditions. Tanita as well as Portage should hold on to VFR conditions throughout the day on Wednesday, and then Chilkoot and White will see conditions deteriorate from MVFR to IFR as we progress through the afternoon and especially by evening. Freezing levels in the morning on Wednesday will be down at the surface out into the middle of the Alaska Peninsula into the northern part of the Panhandle, with some areas between 2,000 and 4,000 feet there, the lower Panhandle, and then out toward the western Aleutians, a few areas there upwards to 6,000 feet. Best chance of icing will be below 12,000 feet across British Columbia, Haida Gwaii, and then also west of the west coast across the central Bering below 10,000 feet. Upper level winds, jet stream winds, we have a jet core of 120 to 125 southwesterly winds coming in there through British Columbia down to south of Haida Gwaii, and then also a very strong jet core upwards to northwest winds upwards to 140 knots out over the lower central Bering Sea. That's going to help spin up the stronger low out over the central northern Bering there in the vicinity and west of St. Matthew. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, we continue to see low pressure circulation in the Gulf that'll become a little more elongated with the strongest southwesterly flow coming in down toward Vancouver. And then back out to the west, mid-level winds there at 9,000 feet, a broad area of 60 to 70 knot winds moving through the lower Bering Sea. And then as we go into the 3,000 foot level, still low pressure circulation out toward the central Gulf with winds coming upwards of 45 knots in through British Columbia, east side of Haida Gwaii, and then back out across the Bering, widespread winds of 50 to as high as 75 knots on the backside of that low by Wednesday afternoon. This will lead to areas of turbulence below 6,000 feet in the southeast Panhandle, a broad area of considerable moderate turbulence across the Alaska Peninsula, extending out the length of the Aleutians below 4,000 feet. There will also be severe turbulence in the vicinity of St. Matthew Island, especially just west of there with that strong circulation on the backside of the low. So keep that in mind, as that low will be producing widespread gale and storm force winds as we head through Wednesday into Wednesday night. So that does it for your flight weather. And if you are able to get out, be sure to check the latest conditions and forecast, and certainly have a safe flight.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
And once again, you brought some wonderful satellite pictures to show us and do a little show and tell about. It's just amazing. I can get lost in satellite pictures all day. What did you bring today?
Right. Well, weather satellites, what are they good for? Yeah. Of course, there's the pretty pictures that they bring us. You know, we've got a picture here from April of 2012. Okay. The Sumi NPP satellite, it's what they call a polar orbiter, which means it covers Alaska because we're near the pole. Beautiful image. You can see a storm off of southeast Alaska, the sea ice along the Bering Sea up into the Arctic. A really nice picture, and this is important because it allows a forecaster to see where the storms are, where the ice is, where the clear areas are. You need to know where the weather is now if you're going to forecast it into the future. Exactly. So satellites give us these good pictures. This is called surveillance of the weather. And you know, that same satellite also has another picture from a little more recently, August of 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle bearing down on the Hawaiian Islands. Okay. Hawaii doesn't get hit by a whole lot of tropical storms or hurricanes. Sometimes it does. And here's a picture from the same satellite, the Sumi NPP Polar Orbiter. It shows Tropical Storm Iselle approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the southeast. You can see the storm swirling away there, and then there's the Hawaiian Islands. This is a tropical storm, not quite as strong as a hurricane because we don't see the eye wall in there. This is still a serious weather system. And all of this information comes just from that satellite picture. It's so much information, and it's wonderful to look at. You see the beauty and the awe of nature right there depicted in that weather satellite. We call it a polar orbiter because the satellite flies high over the globe. Maybe we could look here at we happen to bring the planet Earth with us. This is our satellite. A polar orbit flies really close to the Earth, maybe 800 kilometers over the Earth, and goes up over the pole and then back down, and then the Earth spins under the satellite as it goes by. That's in contrast to the geostationary birds, which are much further out. And they don't view Alaska quite as well. So we love those polar orbiter satellites here in Alaska.
So when we're a lot closer, we get much better details and imagery and an idea of a better maybe position of what's going on when it's passing right over Alaska or right over Hawaii.
Yes, exactly right. The polar orbiter gives such a good view of places like Alaska. And because it's close to the planet, there's another aspect of satellites in the polar orbit that is helpful for weather forecasting. It's an aspect that's maybe not as immediately obvious as the pretty pictures that we see. And that is the capacity for the satellite to produce what's called a sounding. That is finding the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. We've all heard of weather balloons. Weather balloons are launched here in Alaska twice a day at a number of airports, everywhere from Barrow to St. Paul Island to Kodiak, Anchorage and Fairbanks, Yakutat, a number of places. Launch these balloons, and we've got a picture of a balloon being launched at an airport, and the balloon goes up. It's pulling a little package, an instrument package with it that reports temperature, pressure, humidity data back, and we use that information to help feed what are called numerical weather prediction models.
The models.
The models, right. It's a mouthful, so we just call it the models. And these computer simulations, these models are computer programs that simulate the motion of the atmosphere. Well, how does a model know what the future will be like? You have to tell the model what things are like now. And you give it all kinds of information, including information from these satellite sounders. Very important. Just how important are they? We have a recent, comparatively recent study that really brings home, and this is Superstorm Sandy. We have a track image here of the track of Hurricane Sandy. It was down in the Caribbean around Cuba, and then it moved north over the ocean, offshore of the eastern seaboard, and then at the last minute, Sandy made what's called the left hook. It turned hard to the left and slammed into New Jersey. Was a major problem for the mid-Atlantic states, a calamity. It fused with another weather system and became known, this is not an official title, but Superstorm Sandy. It was quite the weather event. Well, the modelers, after the event, there's a group of modelers in Europe. They have a very good model, a frustratingly good model if you're the Americans trying to pursue their excellence. They reran their model afterwards in what's called a data denial study, where they kept everything the same. So this is 6 months after Sandy, but they went back, they reran the same model, they fed the model the same initial conditions, that is telling the model, okay, here's where we think Sandy is, down near Cuba in the Caribbean. Everything was the same as it was in the real forecast, except they didn't let the model know.
No satellite data.
No satellite data. So we're going to put that over here, no satellite data for you. The resulting forecast 5 days out, back when the real Sandy was happening and the model had the satellite data, the forecast was pretty good. We've got a graphic here on the left side. We show the forecast of where Sandy would be, and that's the red bullseye on the left. It's just south of where it actually wound up hitting. Not a bad forecast from this computer simulation 120 hours out. On the right, you see the same model, but it didn't have the satellite data to help it understand things. And the storm is way offshore. It misses. The forecast is more accurate when the model has the satellite data. So that's the idea today we want to convey is weather satellites. They're important because they show us the pictures of where storms are. We see good examples of this. Yeah, the surveillance right now, it's great to look at those pictures. And in addition, behind the scenes, maybe not immediately obvious, but the models have to have that satellite data for them to be good forecasts. And then a meteorologist uses that information to help everyone with the forecast of where the storms will be in the future.
That is fascinating information that we can look at, see where things have been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. That's that old adage there. But seeing that satellites are actually helping us move forward in the weather information system is pretty amazing stuff.
You bet.
And if you want to check out Eric's satellite images that he's been talking about, whether that's something from today or last week or even much further back in Alaska history, you can easily do that yourself. Go to www.gina.alaska.edu and you can find those images there. Eric, thanks so much for joining us once again. And again, we will join you hopefully again soon for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, where you'll tell us more really cool information about the satellites over our heads in Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, we're now in the last segment of our show. We got a lot going on marine-wise, especially as we head through the end of this week and into the weekend. In the meantime, though, if you missed it the other day or over the weekend, ice minimum occurred on September 16th this season for 2021. And now the ice is beginning to slowly grow southward again as we slide deeper into the fall. And so there you have it. Mid-September was the time frame of minimal ice. Looking at winds Wednesday, we have low pressure out in the Gulf. It'll have winds of 20 to 25 knots, the inner canals with waves generally around 4 feet, though they could be upwards of 9 feet there once you get south of Ketchikan through Dixon Entrance. And then south to easterly winds 25 to locally as high as 35 knots there west of Sitka and Gustavus, and waves anywhere from about 10 to 15 feet. On Thursday, kind of the calm before the bigger storm that'll be arriving Friday into Saturday. Winds will be generally in the inner waterways 15 to 20 knots, waves a few feet. Though the southerly winds 20 knots could produce some 8-footers there, again at mouth of Dixon Entrance. And as we get over toward the areas along the outer coast, 25-knot westerly winds with waves of anywhere from 6 feet west of Yakutat to about 8 to 12 feet, extending down toward Craig. Also across the Gulf, relatively quiet, North Gulf, relatively quiet conditions for south central areas. Winds generally north or northwest, 10 to as high as 30 knots there once you get off of the mouth of Cook Inlet to northeast of Kodiak, where waves could be 7 to perhaps as high as 10 feet elsewhere. The north end of Cook Inlet and Prince William Sound, just 2-footers. And on Thursday, we're going to see winds ahead of an area of low pressure that's crossing and kind of re-emerging into the North Pacific and southwestern Gulf. We'll start to see winds pick up from the south over the open waters, 25 knots, waves about 10 feet, and still winds out of the northeast across the central and northern portion of Cook Inlet with waves generally 3 to maybe 5 feet. Wednesday, look for Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, generally westerly winds 20 to as high as 30 knots there on the Gulf and further west toward the Bering. And we're looking at waves 10 feet off of Kodiak Island and Chiknik, but in at least Bristol Bay, only 4 feet. but we are going to see stronger winds arriving for Thursday in response to that very intense low that'll be dropping southeastward across the Bering. Winds picking up 30 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island from the southwest, but 40-knot gales from the west-southwest across the Alaska Peninsula, and waves 20 feet or higher as you get west of Cold Bay on the Bering side. And then for Wednesday, generally southwesterly gales 35 to 40 knots throughout the Aleutian chain, waves 10 to 12 feet on the North Pacific side, and on the order of 10 to 15 feet on the Bering side. And then we have that core of very strong storm force winds coming in on Thursday with the low center. And we see winds, storm force winds of at least 50 knots, even higher as you get out to the open waters there of the Bering northwest of Unalaska and Nikolsky. And waves in those areas could be up around 30 feet. On the Pacific side, upper teens to maybe near 20 feet. And looking at Wednesday, we have a low center taking shape to the southwest of St. Lawrence and in the vicinity of St. Matthew. And there's potential for wind gusts as high as 65 knots. That's hurricane force there in the vicinity of St. Matthew, with waves building to 20 feet. And then on Thursday, the core of those strongest winds drop down into the lower southeast portion of the Bering. Backside of it, look for gale force winds anywhere from 35 upwards to 45 knots. Waves 15 to 20 feet, the rule, from south of St. Lawrence down to just east of St. Paul and St. George. And across the Arctic coast, winds will generally be east 15 to 20 knots, waves 5 feet. Lower Chukchi off the northwest coast, Kotzebue Sound out of the east to, generally an easterly direction, 20 knots, waves 5 or 6 feet. And then on Thursday, winds will turn more northeasterly along the Arctic coast, and then northeast to north down along the Chukchi Sea at 20 to as high as 30 knots. Still 49 knots off of the Seward Peninsula there north of St. Lawrence Island, with waves of 15 feet. So here is that low taking shape in the Bering as we go overnight, and the low still lingering there across the Gulf. And then as we go into Wednesday, we could see that low bottom out near or just below 970 millibars, and that feature will eventually emerge into the Gulf and produce perhaps even a stronger storm Friday into Saturday. So thanks for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.